عليكم, صباح الخير, صباح الطموح. It's a tough act to follow. I struggle just going up those stairs, let alone Kilimanjaro, so well done. I'm here, ladies and gentlemen, to shed some light on what you can do with a legal mind. First and foremost, you can defy the conventional wisdom of management consultants and speak to an audience without a PowerPoint presentation. But before I go through the full list, and it's a long list, I'd like to anchor my discussion with a few introductory remarks. I'll put my cards on the table and declare my motives. I'm speaking both as a concerned Arab and as a potential legal employer. And in both capacities, I'm here because we are in dire need of many more professionals from the Arab world with high quality legal training. I'm specifically focused on legal training from the United States for reasons that I will explain shortly. But let me first frame the problem. I recently stepped down from heading the Harvard Arab Alumni Association, which in addition to its purpose in supporting alumni, spends a lot of time encouraging more Arabs to study in top US universities. And in over 6 busy years, we lobbied the university to admit more Arabs. We demystified the process for thousands of Arab students through info sessions and conferences in many Arab cities. And thanks to these and other efforts, we're able to double the number of Arab students at Harvard. That's the good news. However, the area of least improvement was the number of Arabs studying law. The number has stagnated at the JD program specifically at 1 to 2 students out of 160 Arab students at Harvard alone. That is a problem, and these numbers need to change. To put it also in my professional context, as Shehana mentioned, I grew up in Saudi Arabia, so my current law firm recruited me to help set up their Saudi office and tasked me with the unenviable task of recruiting a US-trained Saudi partner. So back in 2011, I surveyed the market, and these are the results, and I'm reading from the report I submitted to the management at the time. So out of 2,000 registered lawyers in Saudi Arabia, to put it in context, New York State alone has 140,000 lawyers. So 2,000 back in 2011. The numbers went up a little, but not much. Out of those 2,000 even, only 50 and 100 were English-speaking commercial lawyers. And of these, less than 20 had JDs from reputable US institutions. And out of the 20, only 10 were actually still practicing law with law firms. The good news is that we lucked out and we were able to hire one of the 10, Loel Akas, who it turned out to be a superstar, and later we were able to hire people like Shehana. But the problem persists, and these numbers are indicative of a real problem. In recent years, we've seen more lawyers come from Saudi Arabia and from the Arab world, but the numbers remain very dismal. Why are the numbers so low? Perhaps it's because of the lack of prestige associated with being a lawyer in the Arab world. In Saudi Arabia, until recently, being a lawyer was just like being a glorified PRO, a kashka mu'aqqib in a way. It may also have something to do with the lack of rule of law. If law itself is not respected, by extension, lawyers are not. But I also believe it may have a lot to do with the lack of awareness of paths to studying law and what you can do with a law degree. And that is something we can do something about. I was recently in Boston. I'm now the Middle East director on the Harvard Alumni Association board. So in that capacity, I met with admissions officers from the different schools of the university And I deliberately spent a lot of time with the law school admissions office, and we were able to convince them that we need to actually have the law school admissions office tour the Middle East to explain the process and encourage more Arab students to apply. So that is hopefully going to move the needle a little bit. Until that happens, you're stuck with me. So now that we know there's a problem, some of you may still think, well, why is it a problem, and why do we actually need more lawyers? There's a subtle yet an important distinction between practicing law and actually studying law, specifically in the US context. Even if you never want to set foot in a law firm, there may be compelling reasons why you or your siblings or your children or someone you know may consider the study of law. And let me explain how the study of law in the US is particularly different. The substance of what you learn in law school is paradoxically immense and irrelevant in a way to a great extent. You will read hundreds, if not thousands, of law cases in books at font 9 or 10. I remember I had to change my reading glasses twice in law school. And you'll learn about contracts and criminal law and all sorts of laws, but these are all under open book exams. So 3 years later, you will graduate with very little substantive knowledge of the law, or black letter law as we call it. But this gets me to the one thing I want you to remember from this presentation. It is my humble opinion, which I nonetheless hold with absolute certainty, that the study of law is the safest alternative to brain surgery. And what I mean by that is that the way law is taught in the United States will mess up your brain in the most beautiful of ways. And that is because it's taught through what is called the Socratic method. The method basically is applied with a professor asking a question, asking a student to state one side of a case, and then asking 10, 15 follow-up questions to the student and to the other students to poke holes in the argument, to advance the opposite argument, to strengthen or improve that argument. At its height, the Socratic method sometimes is applied through what we call the flip, and I'm not talking about any hand gestures here. The flip is when a student is deep into making his argument for one side of a case, and the professor says, pause, flip, and take the opposite side. Pause and think for a moment what that does to your brain. And then pause and ask, what does that have to do with the study of law at all? I look back often when I'm at a negotiation table to that moment, and when I'm trying to apply the flip to anticipate and preempt what my opponent across the table is trying to do. I'm sure many of you apply that in your business dealings, in fact, even with your siblings or significant others. But think if that skill becomes second nature to you. And think again, what does that have to do with law school? And this is precisely the point. And this is precisely why many people choose to go to law school, then go on to other careers. In the US, presidents from Jefferson to Lincoln to JFK to Clinton to Obama, the current one is not a law student, by the way. World leaders from Gandhi to Mandela to Nehru, business CEOs, writers, artists, Matisse, Kandinsky. I have to admit that a PowerPoint would have been helpful with that list. But my point is, the world is truly your oyster with a law degree. And you can go into careers from politics to business to foreign service to international organizations to journalism to whatever you name it. And you can also practice law. There's that option as well. And within even the practice of law, you can work at law firms, you can work at international organizations, you can be a lawyer for the government, you can be a judge, etc. Let me briefly share an insight into my practice and why I look forward to work every morning. I'm a corporate lawyer, and luckily, every business transaction in this world requires a contract. Contracts were my favorite class in law school. And to many non-lawyers, and admittedly to some lawyers, being a corporate lawyer means getting the precedent, changing the name of the company, and just giving it to the client and charging them a lot of money for it. But to me, the practice of corporate law or contracts is like looking into a crystal ball and trying to figure out what contingencies will transpire in the future and asking the client and the other side to agree about all these contingencies today. That requires a critical mind. That also requires a good understanding of the client's business. And that also requires a lot of head scratching, and that's what makes it a very intellectually fulfilling job. Life is too short to do something you don't like. And if you're not intellectually stimulated in your job, start looking for another one. Some of what I do is advising governments or companies on complex energy projects or infrastructure or what have you. I was still an associate 10 years ago when I was sent to Yemen for over 12 times to participate in a financing there. And I found myself, because it was the first large project in the country, sitting on a ministerial committee with 5 other ministers. And I also found myself reading reports about how big the explosion parameter would be if something goes wrong. So it's pretty cool stuff. And even when I'm not reading about things like that, I'm still getting paid to argue. So I hope I've convinced you that becoming a lawyer may be something that you or someone you know should consider. And the good news is it's not too late. If you, for some reason or another, under family pressure, decided to be an engineer or businessman or something else, the good news is that the study of law in the United States is a postgraduate degree. So no matter what you studied undergrad, it's not too late. All you need to do is hopefully you will have done pretty well in your undergrad degree, and you just take a simple yet painful exam called the LSAT, and voila, you can apply, and 3 years later, you take another painful exam called the bar, and you're a lawyer. And if all that doesn't work, I invite you to sit down, use your Apple TV or whatever subscription you have to watch Suits, or for the older generation, you can watch A Few Good Men or Al Pacino and The Devil's Advocate, and that might also convince you. I'm pretty passionate about this, and I care a lot about this because we are really in desperate need of more lawyers and specifically of more critical minds in the Arab world. I care because this is a very solvable problem. And I care because we can and must do better. Or as my favorite poet, Al-Mutanabbi, said, وَلَمْ أَرَ فِي عُيُوبِ النَّاسِ شَيْئًا كَنَقْصِ الْقَادِرِينَ عَلَى التَّمَامِ. Thank you.